Good evening. Welcome to Hedberg Public Library and this evening's program. If I could have your attention, we'll go ahead and get started. Tonight's program is called General Motors and United Auto Workers in Janesville, Exploring Their History. I'm Sue Braden, one of the reference librarians here at Hedberg Library. Thank you for joining us. We do ask, if you have your cell phone, I'd like you to take it out right now. I'll take out mine and turn it off. If you need to have it muted, you can do that. If you need to take or make a call, please step out of the room and go to the lobby. But let's all silence our cell phones. Thank you. A couple other housekeeping notes. If you need to use the restroom during the program, if you exit the program room, turn right again and go past the security gates as if you're leaving. The restrooms are on your left, but do come back. Another housekeeping note, at the back of the blue chairs, we've got a small round table with a framed photograph of a red, is it a Tahoe? Jean, my colleague, is standing back there and pointing down, and there's a picture of people, Suburban, excuse me, and we'd like your help. If you know any of the people who are in those pictures, we'd appreciate your help. Our good volunteer Betty went through and put little numbers on everybody's face. And then there's a sheet of white paper with a corresponding number. So if you know Bill Smith is number 15 in a particular photo, please write that in for us. We'd appreciate it. And there's several other photos in the binder right beneath that photo. So I wanted to make you aware of that. Thank you. Also, I'd like to thank JATV for recording our program this evening. So for people who aren't able to be here or would like to watch it again, this will be on JATV, and I suspect we'll also have a couple of DVDs made, so if you want to check it out like a book, you can take that home. And also I'd like to mention I learned this evening of a spelling error on the names of one of our 12 men who were interviewed, and on your handout in the middle of the page where it lists the interviewees, Harry Johnson should be Harry Johnston.
No. James.
I'm sorry.
James, you got the wrong one.
I got the wrong one. Well, I'm glad you're here to make sure I correct the right one. So it should be James V. Johnston. All right, you're welcome. Thank you. Do you remember these slogans? Like a rock, 1991 to 2004 for the Chevrolet trucks. Or baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet from the mid-70s. And one of my favorites, see the USA in your Chevrolet from the 1950s and 60s, sung by Dinah Shore as the theme song to the Dinah Shore Chevy Show. Try saying that quickly 3 times. Tonight we invite you to sit back, relax, and learn how you can explore the rich history of General Motors and the UAW in the Janesville area. Our guest speakers will review resources that are available to you. We'll introduce you to retired area workers who gave their time and energy along with their families to share their stories from working from the 1920s through the 1960s for future generations. These stories are now digitized and available online. 3 other retirees are with us tonight to share some recollections of their time with General Motors and the UAW. In January of 2009, Mary Fanning Penny, who was the PR manager at the Janesville GM plant, helped arrange a gathering of staff from Hedberg Library, the Rock County Historical Society, and the Wisconsin Historical Society to meet at the plant. We met on a snowy January morning. We sorted, boxed, and hauled away items to include in our collections. So we do appreciate GM's help with that, GM Janesville, by making sure these 3 groups had materials of local history that stay here in Rock County. Our first speaker will be Ruth Anderson, archive specialist with the Rock County Historical Society. I hope I got that right, Ruth. And she's a volunteer, and she's going to visit about the resources available at the Rock County Historical Society, located here in Janesville.
Good evening. The Rock County Archives is in the Wilson King Stone House, which is between the Tolman House and Mercy Hospital. We actually face Mineral Point, and our physical address is 933 Mineral Point. In our collection, we have a series of the cassette tapes that Sue has already mentioned, with the transcriptions. These are, the old style that you and I are used to listening to. Our kids wonder what they are, but, well, time flies when you're having fun. GM is a story that has touched everyone. In my family, my grandfather worked at Fisher Body, my mom worked in the office during the war, my aunt worked on the line. She turned heads and spun shoulders. After they shut down the ammunition line, my mom asked Oliver White if he would get her a souvenir from the line. What she wanted was one of the smaller shells. Well, they were gone. So I grew up with one of the larger shells behind the door in my bedroom. Now my mom thought it would be a good idea if my brother would take that, and Brother Dale worked at the plant for many years. That's where he met his wife, Karen. But Mom thought he ought to make a lamp out of that shell. Well, it wasn't on his priority list, so he left it in a garage when he moved out into the country. You can imagine my surprise when there was a headline in the paper shortly after that there was this bomb that the police brought out their bomb squad, and they picked up this bomb and they exploded that shell. And I knew from the address, I said, oh, that's the shell that was sitting in my bedroom while I was growing up. But that's part of my GM history. What is your GM history? We tell it. Hopefully our children are listening. Maybe not. And if they're not, how are we going to tell our grandchildren? What are you going to leave? And this is one of the things that we do at the archives, is we collect these things. And hopefully we're not collecting just a jumble of stuff, but we want something that's put together. Hopefully you're keeping your own archives at home, but if you've put together some memories and it's in just a few pages published form with maybe some pictures, we would love to add that to our collection. In the collection though, now we have a lot of the daily Newsline newsletters. Those are recent acquisitions. We have, let's see, the Oral History Project that I mentioned before. I have just page after page. You're probably glad I'm not reading it word for word. We have images, cars, food, Chevy workers leave jobs with locals, as local as 95 and 121 walk out responding to a national strike in 1940. We have a petition card circulated by Consolidated Automobile Workers Alliance. I think that was in 35. A card during the 1937 strike. UAW pickets supporting checker cab. White Star driver strike in 37-38. Night duty strikers at the Chevy plant. Cheering sit-downers coming out of the plant after vacating sit down, and there's a close-up of that. We have some of the World's Fair material, the printed brochures. Remember back in, I think it was 1933, they closed down the plant here, and they moved production to Chicago, to the World's Fair. And we added that to one of our programs, a year ago, year and a half ago, on when was it? And we had information about that car line down there in Chicago, and I understood that at that time, those workers got clean duds every morning. So they looked really white and fancy for their part of the World's Fair. We have a lot of the brochures, for example, the first 75 years of transportation. Anything that's been published in the Gazette, we try to keep a copy of that in our what we call F files. The bigger stuff goes into our flat files, and then we have some other things that are drawer files. So we have many, many collections. I hope that you have a chance to come down and visit us and take a look at some of those. We are open at the archives on Wednesdays and Thursdays, 9 till 3, and on Friday afternoons, noon till 3. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth. Our next guest speaker is Peter Gottlieb. He is Wisconsin State Archivist and the head of the Wisconsin Historical Society's Library and Archives Division, and he'll visit about resources at his location. Peter?
Thank you, Sue. Sue asked me to speak for just a few minutes, which is good because we don't have a lot of GM and UAW history at the Historical Society. Some of the things that we have are the same as what Rock County Historical Society has. So we have a run of the Daily Newsline from 1986 to 1999. We have some issues of the Rock River Review from the GM Assembly Division. We have one collective bargaining agreement from 1968. But what we have more of is a result of some collecting that the Historical Society did around in the early 1950s when we were focusing on the history of labor in Wisconsin. And so we have some good records of the early union organizations at the GM plant. And I wanted to take a little bit more time to describe those for you. I think particularly interesting, we have some records of the early employee associations in the plant from the early 1930s. At that period of time, and sometimes sponsored by the companies, employees were just getting together to associate and to try to do some collective bargaining. And these became forerunners of the independent unions later on affiliated with the AFL and the CIO. So we have records of the Chevrolet Employees Association in 1934 and 1935. We have things like the Constitution, financial statements, form letters to members concerning social events, elections, and we have also a few items in that same collection from the Fisher Body Employees Association. We have records of UAW Local 121 from about 1935, no earlier, 1934 to 1950. Correspondence, minutes, local union minutes, minutes of stewards and committeemen hearings, and minutes of special meetings with management from about 40 to 44, and also the charters of affiliation. And then we also have some records of UAW Local 95. Correspondence, minutes, count books, membership records, seniority lists, and also minutes of the United Automobile Workers AFL, which was a separate union before the CIO came along. It gets a little bit down to the weeds of labor history. So that's what I think we've collected that contributes to the history of the plant and the local union. Let me also say that although our headquarters are in Madison, all of those local union records I talked about are actually located in Whitewater because we've established area research centers throughout the state where records from regions are kept because that's where those records came from. So you don't have to come to Madison to look at those local union records. They are at Anderson Library on the UW Whitewater campus, and Whitewater a little closer to Rock County and to you. I just also wanted to mention that our museum has collected a few things, gloves, safety goggles, Kevlar sleeves, and things like that. And finally, let me just say that, reiterate what you heard from the Rock County Historical Society. If you have material that you've collected or that members of your family have collected and you're keeping it at home, I hope you will donate it to the Rock County Historical Society. It's an outstanding organization. It will keep your history very well. If Rock County Historical Society gets more than it can handle, we at the Wisconsin Historical Society would be glad to help preserve the history of GM and the local unions here in Janesville. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now, can you hear me all right? I tend to stand right next to the mic, so can you still hear me? Okay, thank you. All right. Well, my job now is to just briefly explain some of the things here at Hedberg Library, and because they're here, I won't go into a lot of detail, but personally, I think one of our greatest resources are the staff of the library who can help you find the information you need. So remember, when you leave tonight, you won't remember everything you've heard. Give us a call, stop by, send us an email. We'll get you pointed in the right direction, and we're happy to help you find what you need. If you're familiar with the library, if not, I'll share with you that here at Hedberg Library, in our reference department, we have something called the Janesville Room. It is an actual room dedicated to Janesville and Rock County area history. And we have a lot of information about a lot of different things. In the Janesville Room, we actually have a clipping file. It's a wooden file cabinet with A through Z folders on different topics. One folder of which is General Motors, and another folder is United Auto Workers. And into those folders, we drop copies of newspaper articles that, with the help of volunteers, we clip from the Janesville Gazette. And then we actually index those clippings into an online database created by my colleague Laura Gottlieb's initiative 8 years ago. And Laura and Diana McDonald are our two wonderful indexers who take those clippings and get them in our database. And in a few minutes, I'll show you where to find that on our website. And you can stop by reference anytime. We'll explain how to use it. But it's a wonderful source. Also in the Janesville Room, we have photographs. We have all kinds of things. So the Janesville Room is the place to go when you're here at the library for local history. We also have the Janesville Gazette on microfilm, all the way back to the beginning in the 1840s. So every article ever published in the Janesville Gazette is here at the library on microfilm. And if you have the date it appeared, come on over. We'll show you how to pull that up on the microfilm. You can print a copy or bring a flash drive, save it to your flash drive, and have an electronic copy that you can email to Aunt Betty in Boston or wherever you wish. With the Janesville Gazette, however, there's no index to that microfilm. So our local history database is the index we're creating. And every newspaper clipping we can get our hands on, we put the title, the date, and the page it appeared in that database. So you can pull that up on the computer, and if we don't have the actual clipping, you can always go to the microfilm, and there it will be. So keep that in mind too. We have other digitized sources. Janesville's Past includes our city directories, which are a great source of information. I took a peek at the 1917 city directory, and of course Sampson Tractor isn't listed yet. But in the 1919 city directory online, you will find a lot of hits for Sampson Tractor. And back then, it listed a person's occupation and place of employment. So if you put in Harold Smith, or excuse me, if you put in Sampson Tractor and you come up, you might find the listing for Harold Smith and his address, and it'll say Assembler, Sampson Tractor. So that's another resource. And again, I'm prejudiced, but I think one of our greatest assets are the professional staff and librarians here at Hedberg that will help you find what you need. And any of the staff at the library will get you pointed in the right direction, so always ask for help when you're here. All three organizations strive to collect, compile, catalog, and preserve GM and UAW history. And quite often, we'll learn things we didn't know before. Just last week, we had an older couple come in, and she was working on her husband's genealogy, and this gentleman's grandfather was a sibling to Joseph Craig's first wife. I believe her name was Maud. And so here she had all these snapshots of Maud standing in front of their farm called Craig Knoll out on Magnolia Avenue or Road, and these little black and white snapshots. And she had postcards. Back then you'd have a postcard of a lovely home in town, and the address of their home was 603 Court Street. Not East Court Street, but 603 Court Street. And then with this woman's research, we've learned when Joseph Craig died, and we went and printed off, it was in the paper on December 31st, 1958. I have part of it on the back table here of the tribute to Joseph Craig, of course, who brought General Motors to Janesville. So that history's out there, and if you do have any news clippings or scrapbooks, you can loan to us. We'd love to at least index those articles, and do keep us in mind. I'd recommend you call or stop by first. Don't come in with 3 boxfuls, but we'd love to take a look at what you have if you're willing to share. All right, the next part of our program, any questions? And quite often with this sort of program, you think, well, I know I have a question, I just don't know what that question is yet. So keep us in mind, just call or stop by or contact any of the organizations after tonight with your questions. All right. Moving along, the next part of our program, we'd like to introduce you to GM and UAW in their own words. And these are the digitized versions of these wonderful interviews, over 70 hours of interviews from 1976 and 1977 of men who worked, most of whom worked at General Motors and were involved with UAW, but some were, one gentleman was from Parker Penn, another gentleman worked at the cotton mills, another person was an electrician. So they weren't all General Motors, but they had varied backgrounds. They were all involved with manufacturing or labor in Janesville in the early half of the 20th century. And as you've heard already, these interviews were done in 1976 and 77 as part of the Janesville Bicentennial Oral History Project. If you recall, in 1976, for our nation's bicentennial, communities across the land were encouraged to preserve their local history. And Richard Hartung, who was then head of the Rock County Historical Society, conceived the idea of conducting these interviews. Clem Imhoff was the person who conducted the interviews, and he's living in Kentucky. We've talked with him on the phone. He sends his greetings. He wished he could be here. And what I'd like to do at this time, I'm actually going to read off the names of these interviewees, and we were have been looking for photographs of the men interviewed, and the last couple of months we've been contacting local family members. We did not reach everyone, but as I read these names, if you're here as a family member of one of those interviewed, I would like you to stand and remain standing till I'm finished reading the names, and then we'd like to recognize you. Lou Atkins, Don Dooley, Ralph Hilkin, Harry Johnson, James Jack V. Johnston, Gerald Litney, Eugene Osmond, Hugo Press. Is that the right way to pronounce that?
Price.
Price? Thank you, thank you. John Scott, Glenn Swinbank, John Wesley Van Horn, and James Wells. And I'd like to give them a round of applause. Now on our displays, at this end of the table, we have a trifold board that has these wonderful black and white photographs of each of the people interviewed. Just maybe a month ago, Ruth, was it? we got together to talk about tonight's program, and lo and behold, the Rock County Historical Society has these original photographs that we think were taken at the time of the interviews, and they're here with us tonight. They brought them over, we scanned them in, and our wonderful PR staff enlarged them and put them on that board. So, and then along with that board, we have a little biographical information. So how do you get to these interviews? Well, if you like, you can certainly go to the Janesville room. We'll get out the audio cassettes and you can listen to them on the audio cassette, but you can also find them on our webpage. And before I forget, I do want to mention that the word-for-word transcription of these interviews will be available in book form for you to check out and take home, just like a regular book, sometime after the first of the year. They have to be bound, and we're creating a table of contents and good things like that. So don't worry about remembering how to get to this tonight online. If you prefer the book, that will be available in coming months. So let's take a look at the computer. Okay. Oh, and this is when I get to get out the handy dandy portable microphone. Is this working?
Yes.
Yes? Is it? Okay. And if I forget, I'll just talk louder, but let's get you to where you need to go. And if you have a question as we go along, please let me know. I have to turn that off for just a moment. And we're going to hit escape, and we're going to get out of this. Okay. One moment, please. Slideshow. And I'm missing it. Well, let's see. Get slideshow. All right. I need help. Where's Jean or Diana? Laura. Or Laura. Yes. Where's my start slideshow? Oh, I should just be slideshow. Okay. All right. Oh, I know I can go like that. And now I can do slideshow. Oh, I got it. Thanks, Laura. I just hit the little button. That's not it either. Well, this is a good learning opportunity to realize that when things don't work right for you, that's okay. That's part of it. Oh, I just did this too. Okay, is Jean in the room? Okay. One moment, please. Well, you know, we're just going to go to Plan B, folks.
Laura, where'd you get Jean?
Oh, that's okay. We'll just go to Plan B. Okay, what you're looking at, and don't worry about remembering all this. We do have on your program, I believe, on our website. We also have a bibliography I forgot to mention in the back of the room on the table at the end, and that has our website too. So it's just hedfordpubliclibrary.org. And am I okay with the mic? I don't want to blow you out. All right, so here we are at the Hedford Library homepage. And underneath the photo of the library, you'll see this bar with different labels on it. Go all the way to the right and click Community. And that brings you to a web page with links to things related to the Janesville community. And further down, you'll see one called Local History. Instead of clicking the words local history, you'll click the link beside it, and now you are at the local history page of the Hedford Library website. This is where all the good stuff is. So this is where you'll come when you want to find the local history page of the Hedford Library website. Now, you'll notice we have under local history websites, Wisconsin Hometown Stories Janesville. Do you remember when Wisconsin Public Television came here a few years ago? And it was on television, and we have the DVD here. There's a nice section on GM, and we have the link to it right here. Further down, under digitized resources, you'll see something called Janesville's Past. I'm just going to peek at it real quickly for you. Because I want you to see, this is on the server up at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We wrote a grant and we're given money to digitize lots of our photos and our older city directories. So this Janesville Past is fun. There are some GM things in here, but you can click and just take a look at things that way as well. But the next thing, what you really want to get to for these interviews is called right here, GM and UAW in their own words. So you'll click one time and it brings you to the page that describes the project. Harris Reporting, Jan Harris from Harris Reporting was hired to do the word-for-word transcription, but we here at the library were able to save some money by converting those analog files to digital audio files. And then from there, Emmerich Gunderson, our wonderful computer systems manager, and our PR people got it on the internet. So at this page where it says the interviews, just click right beside the interviews, and now you get the list of the men who were interviewed and their biographies. We're going to use Eugene Osmond. Eugene, all of the men are deceased at this time, but we are working to find obituaries and information to have Eugene's daughter-in-law and granddaughter work here at the library. So we're real pleased to have some of the Osmond family here too tonight. So anyway, at this page, you're wondering, well, what do I do here? You can listen to the interview, and it's broken down by parts. There is some free software you have to download. And I won't demo that here, we're all set to go. But at home, when you get a little message, it's okay, it's free. You need that software in order to hear the interview. But before you start listening, you may want to come down and see where it says read summary of interview. And I'm going to be providing screenshots to JATV, so on TV it'll look much better than it does here. But these content descriptions, somebody 30 years ago listened to the tapes and typed up a little outline so you could tell what was discussed at each one. So here, can you see my little laser pointer? Here we go. Eugene Osmond, session 1. It has his address, the date, June 8, 1976, interviewer Clem Imhoff, and there's an introduction. They usually talk about their background, growing up, things like that. So this content description allows you to just get a sense of what's here, and you might decide to start at a certain later on in the interview or jump around to hear different sections. Okay, and then the other piece before we listen is right at the bottom. It's I know in the back you may not see this, but it says read the full text of the interview. This is the part that will be available as a book, and it's the actual Q&A, question and answer, word for word transcription. So Harris Reporting did a great job. It took a long time, but it's wonderful. It's also keyword searchable. We've had some reference questions already, and I won't go into those stories, but we were able to, the person who called found these online and did a keyword search. Actually, they may have even Googled it, and it came up in Google. I can't remember, but you can find a person's name or a different section, and it'll jump you right to that part of the interview. So now, let's go ahead and listen. So we're going to start with Eugene, and we're just going to click part 1. And it takes about 20 to 30 seconds, a little lag time. Oh, and it would help to plug in the audio cord. But just be sure you download that free software.
June 8, 1976. Today's interview is with Mr. Gene Osmond of 1416 East Van Buren Street in Janesville, Wisconsin. We're talking with Mr. Osmond in his home. My name is Clem Imhoff. Mr. Osmond, I wanted to start off today by asking you about your family's background. If you could give us a little summary of your family's background, please.
My parents were both born in the area. north of Janesville. My mother lived on the farm, just on Highway 14. After you get off of City 14 going north, my dad lived up the road, maybe 2 or 3 farms, and as he used to pick up the milk to take it to the factory or wherever it was delivered to at that time, why he met my mother, and eventually they were married, and had, through the evolution of time, why they had moved to Janesville, and that was where they lived at the time that I was born. And at that time, my dad was a railroad worker, active in organizing the brutal railroad strikes that they had, and this was before 1908, because I was born in 1908, and I was born on a railroad payday. That's how I remember some of these pertinent facts that I'm speaking of here. Eventually my dad, because it was so dangerous, the work that he was doing on railroads, that so many people got hurt, losing their arms, part of their hands, their lives. He being a switchman was dangerous, and it was decided between he and my mother that he would leave the railroad and go back to farming, which he did. And,
Well, what time was that, do you recall?
no, I don't. There's nothing vivid enough at the time that happened that recalls to my memory. I just don't remember the dates. And I don't exactly remember whether it was he went back to the farm working for doctors who operated the Pemberton Clinic, or whether it was he went back to the farm operated by the then officer of the Farm Bureau, whose name was Mr. Hemingway. Now,
I am going to pause it. It'd be awfully easy to just listen and listen and listen, but we've got some other folks here to speak with us. So, but isn't that quality wonderful when you consider it was on an audio cassette tape? The equipment was provided by Blackhawk Technical Institute at that time, and they just did a top-notch job. And the questions, he really does a great job of bringing out so much information. We're just so pleased and thrilled to bring these to you now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just click that off. You can start at any part. You don't have to start from the beginning and work through. I think the parts do correspond a little bit with the timing that you'll see in the outlines. But if you have questions or you can't get this to work right from home, give us a call or stop by. We'd be happy to walk you through. But so I just wanted to tease you a bit with that, and that'll be a nice thing you can explore. A couple other things I just want to mention about this project. And at the time, when we decided to do this, of course, there's an issue of funding, and I would be remiss if I did not mention our gratitude to the UAW Local 95 and Todd Bryan. Did I pronounce that correctly, right? Brian, it is, thank you. He was head of a committee that donated the original seed money for the project, and then the library's foundation board said, well, if UAW will chip in, we'll chip in too, so they matched that. And then from there, we did get funding from the Community Foundation of Southern Wisconsin. Also, one of the granddaughters, Amy Dooley, Don Dooley's granddaughter, heard about it, and she donated some money toward the project as well. So I did want to be sure to mention that.
Can you turn the volume off?
Oh, yes. Thank you. That's much better. Sorry, folks. That wasn't a test or anything. Okay. Anyway, I've already mentioned the staff who helped us get this online, and we do encourage you to explore it and enjoy it. And I did want to mention too, at the end of the program, you're welcome to stay and visit and have coffee and peruse the displays. But without further ado, I would like to move on to the next portion of our program.
Oh, I did forget one little thing. We don't have the obituaries of all the men interviewed, so if you notice some things, information you have, we'd love to get that information from you. Like I said, without that index, we can't get that. And then we can share back and forth with the Historical Society and get each other's records up to date. So, all right, moving on. We have 3 retirees with us here this evening.
I can hear you better from the other mic.
Can you? Thank you, Doris. All right, I'll make the switch.
Is this better?
Yeah. Okay. We have 3 guests with us this evening who will share some of their experiences with us. And I forgot my name. One moment, please. Oh, I don't have. Our first guest is Bruce Penny. Bruce started at the General Motors Assembly Plant in 1970 and retired in 2006. And he was the president of UAW Local 95. And he also, I may let Bruce explain what he did beyond that. He was also an international Region 4 representative for UAW 95. Bruce Penny.
Thank you, Sue. And I would like to, on behalf of everyone that's ever worked at the Janesville facility, from way back in when these tapes were taken or talking about them, up until even the present, thank you for doing this. It's an important part of our history. And I know these voices I listen to, they're my heroes, especially from the GM plant. They made life better, a lot better for thousands to follow, myself included. And listening to the tapes, I was excited to see that it's coming out in book form, but it's so nice to hear the voices, and especially if it's your father, or your, but to me they're great too. But thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate that. I hired in 1970, and those were relatively good times. Everyone was working long, hard hours. Everyone was making a decent living. We would go great guns for 3-4 years and then fall off for a little bit. We'd take a breather and then we'd go back. Feast or famine, they called it. And it kept going until probably, you remember the oil embargo of the early 80s. Gas prices went sky high. GM's market share started dropping. Of course, we were building what they call the gas guzzlers. And so hard times hit GM. And along with that, there was these Japanese auto companies that were coming over building vehicles in the United States, which we called transplants, was commonly the term used. Now, the only probably alternative to not buying a gas guzzler in those days was to buy a cheap foreign product. Before then, that's what everybody considered them. But all of a sudden, they were coming out with cars that got decent gas mileage, had good quality. Times have changed, and just like those voices you heard in those tapes, when times were rough, and I mean, it was terrible inside those walls of that plant that went on. Things that happened. They decided that they needed to make a change, and they stood up and did it. Now is a different change. We got to work together. So GM wanted their market share back. They want profits. The workers always had quality in mind. And health and safety in the workplace. That was our 2 issues that we could never really get addressed till now. So through these hard times, opportunity came for really both sides. And we came through with a national contract that was ratified that had a thing called joint activities programs, which to me were exciting. To a lot of the older workers were scary, salary and hourly. The younger you were, it seemed the easier it was to accept. I was about a third of the way through my career, and I had questions, but I liked the idea of it. So what we did is come through with these joint programs to work together to make our plant more efficient, more productive, and we can now discuss items like quality. We could actually on the line shut the line down if the quality wasn't, if we weren't going to ship something bad out of the back door anymore, because that's our job security. So we had joint programs, quality network, somebody else holler them out if I miss them, suggestions, we had the jobs bank, we had training programs, we negotiated an in-house education center, ergonomics, health and safety, and these were all workers from management and hourly working together with basically an equal say in what goes on in a voice. And we did a lot of good things through that time. Made it more productive, went to 410s, 4 days, 10 hours a day rather than a 5-day week. Saved thousands of monies, thousands of dollars, became more productive. Workers got a 3-day weekend, unless they were working overtime, it was a 2-day weekend. It was really a win-win thing. Worked hard. And another misconception is that we fought all the time, and from the early tapes it was tough. But we actually got together pretty good, management and hourly, on the most part. I remember coming home one night and my wife was looking at me and said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I didn't have any fun at work today." A couple of my friends were off on vacation or whatever, but we got along. Went on vacations with my foreman, you know, salary stuff. It's a small town. You know, you work together, you go to school basketball game, your foreman's sitting next to you, your kids go to the same school. It's a small town. They called it the plant, the cornfield. So I've got a lot of good memories of that time. Unfortunately, with the recession, some bad times have come to Janesville. We're down, but we're not out. We're not closed. GM still talks about Janesville. I really think that in the next year or so, as they regain market share, they're going to have to open a couple new facilities. And I don't see how they cannot look seriously at Janesville with the history we have for building a quality product, coming to work with absenteeism, and working together to get things done. So again, I thank everyone that's involved in this project. I thank all the people that showed up here. It's good seeing some friends I haven't seen for a long time. And it's supposed to remain short, so I'll let Sue get on with the next person. Thank you much.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Tom Westrick. Tom started at the plant in 1977 and retired in 2009. And I'll confess, I told them both right at 6:29 I forgot to bring in their little bios that I was going to read to you. So I'm going to let Tom explain his work so I don't make a mistake. Thank you, Tom.
Well, Sue, since you forgot to bring our bios, I guess we can just tell you whatever we would like. It doesn't necessarily have to be true. Okay. Again, I thank everyone for coming, especially the Osmond family and some other people that I've worked with over the years. It's good to see you again. I was very fortunate. I was one of those scary guys that Bruce was talking about that was involved with the joint activities. Tom Osmond sitting back here, Eugene's grandson. Oh, you can hear me now? Eugene's son actually was one of the first people involved in the Quality Network, which was the seed of the Joint Activities Program, where they had hourly and salaried people working together. So good to see you, Osmond. Like I said, I was very fortunate. I had the opportunity to hire in 1977. After working a very short period of time, I went to my supervisor and I said, "I'm not sure this line work is really what I want to do. I love the paycheck, but I just don't think this line work is what I want to do. I'll even clean bathrooms." And back at that time, I really didn't understand the seniority concept. And he says, "Oh no, I don't think so. You have to have about 40 years seniority to do that." So that was not a good idea. So what he did suggest that I may consider is going into supervision. And I did that. And I was in supervision for almost 13 years. Good experience. Worked with a lot of good people. But then a time came when I had to make a decision whether or not I wanted to continue that. And I chose not to and became hourly and had the wonderful opportunity to be involved with the joint activities at that point. I was the joint training rep, and I went into the Rick Holte Education Center, which was an education center that offered all types of services and programs, computers, we had high school completion programs, we had preparation for skilled trades tests, all different types of things for the employees as well as their spouses. One of the programs that I have the most fondest memories on it was the high school completion program. And it was a competency-based program. It was a program that was endorsed by all 16 school districts around the area in Green and Rock County. And basically, you could earn your high school diploma by completing these competencies. It was different than a lot of other high school completion programs because there weren't a lot of tests. You did projects and things of that nature. One example that I recall is you had to figure out how much it cost to, let's say, carpet this room. By doing that, you demonstrated about 6 or 7 different math competencies. You measured, you converted feet into square yards. Carpeting was sold in square yards at $25.95 a yard, so you did multiplication using decimals and things of that nature. So it was a program that was friendly, especially for those people that have not been in school for a few years, and tests and exams and things like that were pretty frightening. But we had the high school graduation ceremonies. I believe we had about 65 people altogether that went through the external diploma program. We had caps and gowns and pomp and circumstance and mitts and nuts and the whole ball of wax, and it was pretty moving, especially for some of the older folks that were trying to set a good example for their children and maybe even their grandchildren. When Sue said to do some short remarks, I thought she meant my height. So I know this next speaker coming up has a lot of things to talk about, so I will end my part of the speech at this time, but just wanted to let everyone know that we certainly appreciate you coming, and that my experience at General Motors was very positive. Thank you.
I think they all said they could.
Okay, very good, thank you.
All right, so I am Doris Tone. I was the rebel of the cushion line. When I joined General Motors and I went into the cushion line, there must have been roughly 80-some women working there. I was not too young. I had worked at Gilman's ahead of that. When the fellows went to war and became one of the engineers there, I worked for 2 years at Gilman's. Learned a lot. So when I heard that General Motors were hiring, I joined General Motors. My first job was hog ringing. Now that was a machine that you pull down from overhead, and I put a pad on the frame, and then I used this hog ringing machine, and I made some little round circles and attached it. I worked there for quite some time. I even ran one through a glove one day. And I didn't realize what I'd done until I saw the blood running. My foreman, Art Johnson, came over, took a look, and said, "Somebody take her to the nurse." He got pretty white. But these were things that happened. Things happened on your jobs. We worked on every job. But let me just say this. These people that I worked with were the best people in the world. And I mean it sincerely. Not only the women, but the men. But the one thing that was kind of curious, and that is, we had all these women working on the cushion line, but they had men to relieve us. Even though some of these women had worked a long time and could work practically and do practically every job, the men relieved us because they received more money. Okay, that was one of the first lessons I learned. Okay? So I worked there roughly about 4 years. Well, while I was working one day, somebody said, you know, once a week, the officers and also the men, the relief, or the, yeah, the fellows that work out in the plant, went to the union office once a week. They need somebody over here for an alternate. Why don't you take the job? Nobody else wanted it. I said, well, maybe, okay, I will. And I'm glad I did, because it gave me an out. You see, in the cushion line, we were in the cushion line, and that's where we were expected to stay. We did not go out into the other plant. We didn't know what was going on in the other parts of the plant. But because I became alternate, I got in the body shop, I got in the whole area around there, and I saw a lot of jobs that I thought, gee, you know, I wouldn't mind doing some of those myself. And that kind of was a seed that was starting. And then somebody else said, well, why don't you run for office for recording secretary for the local union? Well, they'd never had a woman before. And I thought, well, maybe I'll try that. And the first thing some of my committee men said to me was, be sure and get your card with the union bug on it. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I had the card with the union bug on it. I had the committee men, they were handing these cards out to different parts of the plant. But then I decided I was going to come off my shift. I worked on the night shift. I tried day shift for a while, but kept getting bumped back. So I decided, I guess the night shift is my thing. I'm going to have to be there. So anyway, I went off my shift and I went on the day shift. And the cars would go by, open up their window, and I'd hand them my card. Finally, one fellow, kind of an older fellow, he says, rolled down the window and he says, you know, I wasn't going to vote for a woman, but as long as you had gumption enough to come off your shift, I'll vote for you. Well, there must have been others that felt that way, because I won my election for office. And believe me, that was a learning experience, because we never had a women's committee, so they sent me to the region to find out how to make a women's committee. And came back, started a women's committee. I also found a lot of other things. They were sending me to these different places, Kenosha, some of these other plants where women work, and I saw that women were working out in the plant along with the fellas. I thought, well, I think that would be real nice. So that was just about the time that the EEOC was coming in, Equal Opportunity Commission. And they said women could work anywhere else that the men worked. And I thought, that's maybe my thing. So I sent a telegram to the state EEOC and to the federal EEOC. And I had the little things to show that I'd sent it, so that I had my own, you know, criteria here. About 2 weeks later, a young man pounded on my door and he said, what's this all about? You want to work out in the plant? And I said, I do. I said, I'd like to. Under the EEOC, I'm supposed to be able to. He said, well, why don't you? And I said, they won't allow me to. He said, well, let me go down to the plant. In about a half hour, he was back and he said, oh, you never even signed up for it. I said, young man, I couldn't sign. They wouldn't let me. Well, he said, that's a different story. 2 weeks from that day, I sat with my executive board, because by this time I was a recording secretary, the only woman on the executive board. I sat with all of them. They all looked at me. I had the regional director. I had two lawyers from Detroit. The one fellow said to me, young woman, do you know what you're doing? And I said, you bet your life I do. He said, we're going to have to change all the flow charts. We're going to have to change all the books. Everything's going to have to be changed if we're going to have women working down there. And I said, tough. That ended it. I mean, they had to do it. Okay, so the next step was to sign up for everything that I could sign up for in line with my seniority. Nothing happened. I wasn't getting any jobs. But then I heard through my committee men that the foremen were going down the line saying, if you don't want a woman working next to you, you better take that job. I thought, okay. My next relief time, my next lunch time, because I had to go way across the plant from where we were. I went to the manager's office. And the officer, his secretary said, and what did you want to see him for? And I said, I'll tell him when I get in there. And I opened the door, and he said, hello. And I said, I'm Doris Tone. He said, I know who you are. Troublemaker. He didn't say that. But that's what he thought. And I said, now I just want to say to you, your foremen are going down the line telling if they don't want a woman working next to them, that they better take the job. He said, Doris, no, I honestly don't know that. He said, I'm meeting with my foreman this afternoon, and I will explain that to them. I said, that's fine. I'll take your word for it. But remember, you, as manager of this plant, are in line for an extremely large fine. I know this, and I'm going to be watching you. So, okay. So, my first job was down in the pit. Putting weather stripping underneath the doors. The fellas hated me. The women couldn't get to me because it was too far away, even on relief time. So I worked there. I came home nights almost crying because it was lifting my arms all night long on every job. My husband said, honey, you don't have to do that. And I said, oh, yes, I do. If I die in the process, I'm not going to stop now. So at that time, I was getting a hard time from the relief men because I was taking too much time. I was taking time going back and forth to the restroom, which was way down where the cushion line was. About the third time I said, I've had it. This is it. You get me a committee man. And General Foreman was in the area, and he came over and said, well, what's going on? I said, I'll tell you what's going on. I said, I'm a married woman. I have 2 sons. There's nothing I haven't seen. The next time I have to go to the restroom, I'm going right up here. They both said, you wouldn't. I said, you try me. The next day I had more relief. And it was that way many, many times. It just seemed like it was always pushing, pushing, pushing. But it got to be my birthday. And you know, down there we were all chow hounds. When we brought something, we sent it down the line. I told the relief men, I have got a couple of cakes here, a chocolate cake and a white cake. And I said, when you tell the fellas, if they'd like a piece of cake, to come down and get it. I got some plates down here, and I got some forks. Before the night was over, they came. The cakes were all gone. Now the next time you went down the line, they look at you and say, hi. Okay. They really didn't like me any better, but still, things worked out. I eventually tried other jobs. Some of them I was very foolish about. Here I was, a 5 foot 8.5-inch woman, 200 pounds. I took a job putting headliners in the cars, working in every job, crawling in and out. But you did the job until you found something else. At one time I was carrying windshields, 4 or 5 of them at a time. They didn't have carts in, you know, like they do now. Okay, so I did it. I did it until I could find something else. But I'll tell you one thing. I had a wonderful time while I was working at GM. And I'm not going to say any different than that. because there were wonderful, wonderful people that I worked with. And I finally ended up working in final inspection, in one of the better jobs, better paying jobs. And believe me, I was happy about it, but I didn't continue my whole 30 years. There was a problem at home, and so I went back home where I belonged. But I'll tell you, those years, I wouldn't have changed for the world. And let me tell you, because of that, because of my work at Gilman's, because of my work at General Motors, I was appointed by Governor Lucy to be on the Committee for the Status of Women. There were many, many wonderful things that happened because of that job. And I'm so happy that I worked at General Motors.
Just have a couple other things.
Yeah, I don't want to fall.
I don't want you to.
This leg of mine, just about 6 months or 8 months ago, I was baking chocolate chip cookies of all things, and I went back on a chair sideways, and I rammed this leg against my cupboard. I tore tendons, ligaments, everything else. My son, who was a teacher at Beaver Dam, or was, came back and took me to a specialist. They took x-rays. He came back and he said, "Bad news." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we're not going to be able to operate. Not at 90 years old. We don't do that anymore." So I said, "Okay." So we get by as best we can now.
Yes, this will keep them short remarks. Doris, thank you very much. That was wonderful. We're just about finished. I just want to mention a couple other things. At the bottom of your program, it says future interview project. Now, we don't know what or if that will happen. We hope it will. But at the back of the room, right by the door, is a little box with some handouts. And Betty, would you kindly get the box of pencils and move them over by the door? So people on their way out, if you want to leave your name and contact information, if you're interested in helping in a future project to record your stories, whether you worked at the plant or were involved with the union, or a family or other relative was involved at General Motors, we'd love to have your help on a future project. One other thing I meant to mention earlier, Ruth and both Peter mentioned these news lines. And the day we went to the plant on that snowy day in January, just before we left, a gentleman whose name I don't recall came out with a tractor trailer, and on the trailer were boxes and boxes of these news lines, neatly cataloged and arranged in date order. And what we have is from 1986 through 1999. They said, "Can any of you three organizations use these?" And my supervisor, Mary Bilo, was there. She said, "Yes, we'll take them." And with our wonderful volunteers, one of whom is Betty in the gray suit, who's been helping out tonight, we divided those up so that all three organizations, the state, county, and here at the library, have copies of these, and someday we hope to digitize these as well. The one I'm holding in my hand is dated Friday, October 19th, 1990, 20 years ago. And so if you want to read what was going on 20 years ago, it's here in my hand. Again, I do invite you to take time and enjoy the displays. I want to thank Laurel Fant from the Rock County Historical Society for helping
Linda Kerr from the library helped arrange things. And then in your program are the names of the people who helped with the displays. Jeff Marshall brought a lot of goodies in his dad's bowling shirt. So thank you again. The room here is available to you until 8:30 if you'd like to visit and enjoy the displays. Thank you, and thank you again for coming.